2. Hello and welcome to Healthy Seminars. I'm your moderator, Lauren Brown. I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine. I practice in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It's called AcuBalance Wellness Center. And before I pass on the microphone, so to speak, to Heiner Fruehauf, and I'll give him an introduction on his talk, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and get you familiar with our platform today, because some of you are quite new to Healthy Seminars. So as you know, many of you know, since we started doing these free resources on March 24th, because of isolation, we changed our logo around for a while, and our logo is now about community, unity, immunity. And our intention is to bring us together, hence our cameras are on, so we can kind of connect with each other. Because although we're physical distancing, we didn't agree with the term of social isolation or social distancing. We like the term physical distancing, and here we are having social solidarity. And so what we do at the talk is Heiner's going to present, and then at the end you can ask questions by digitally raising your hand. There's a option at the bottom of your laptop screen under participants or raise hand, and then it comes into a certain order for us, and based on that order we will open up your microphone so you can ask Heiner questions about his lecture, and that will be done at the end of his presentation. And we also then turn on all of your mics so you can send your love and appreciation to everybody. And I just want to give you a quick review of the page. So on Healthy Seminars, we have a link called Resources. And you can find this on any page, and particularly the home page. And it takes you here. And replay, so the replay for this will go up later today or first thing tomorrow. And you can see we have categories. So we have a whole category in telehealth. We have free topical webinars, just TCM knowledge. This is where this webinar, this category will fall under. We do a Conscious Tuesday, where teachers are teaching you how to find calmness in the presence of uncertainty. So tools that you can learn and then take those tools and share with your community, whether it's in person if you're opening your clinic or through telehealth. Then we have Throwback Thursdays, where we get together and watch a lecture together and then open up our mics and talk. Sharon Weisenbaum and her group, there's a group of practitioners that are talking about classical Chinese herbal principles in action in response to COVID. And we have more stuff on pregnancy and virtual treatments. We have stuff on our CU courses, and then we're running a sale on our site all month until the end of April. And when we started this, our intention was, this ties into the sale, the intention was we just wanted to create community. We didn't expect you guys to actually be interested in purchasing CU courses, because most of you weren't practicing or are not practicing, and that's not your priority, nor was it ours. Our priority was to just give you great information and to create community during this time of isolation. We did get a few requests because times were challenging if we could offer discounts. It didn't even enter our mind to do so because we didn't think people would be interested, but apparently people still are. And so we put the whole site on sale, and it will be on sale until April 30th at 25% off. That coupon code is healthy25. And if this isolation continues, we'll revisit April 30th and keep it going as well. We also have a live webinar scheduled for CUs, and so that's also that link. And we already had those planned, and we weren't expecting people to want to attend them, but they've been very well attended, and they're already on sale. So that coupon will not work for that. But the real stuff that I'm excited about these days is the free resources. So when you slide down a little bit on this page, you can just see all the upcoming. We do about 8 or 10 we've been listing at a time. And so here we have Heiner Fruehauf's talk, and then you can see we have a series. We had another one already today by Jennifer, and you can just see there's a series of talks happening, and we keep adding to this. So do check out daily. One that people are really excited about, Lillian Bridges is going to revisit the Year of the Rat. And so just keep checking these all out, and we'll keep adding these. And then again, if we go to this one here, where Heiner's part of, I just want to show you so you can find this easily. It lists the talks. This is the COVID section for us. And then you can find the one by Heiner. And then later today, it will say replay. And that's where you'll be able to go and find the replay for this lecture. So we've done our best to organize this for you so you can find this. And it will end up, I'm just going to go to this page because this is where the replays are. The replay will end up on this page, and you'll be able to find the replay there. And we'll keep it up for a minimum of 48 hours. So just wanted you to be aware of that. Heiner has several courses, over 70 hours of CEU courses on Healthy Seminars, so the coupon applies for that. And I want to let you know about a few other important resources. So Heiner Fruehauf has also put together resources related to COVID on his site, and we'll put that in the chat room. It's classical Chinese. Can you put it in the chat? Because I'll read it. I'm going to actually read it because I want this to be heard for those that aren't watching. Classicalchinesemedicine.org, and at the very top you'll see a link, and he's created a incredible resource of information on Chinese medicine and what they are doing in response to COVID-19 from his teacher. So he's going to that's there. And then I know several people use Heiner's herbal line that he's developed called Classical Pearls. That's classicalpearls.org. And if you're seeing patients or using it for yourself or your family, I do know they offer support as well. So you can check out those two websites. So hopefully healthyseminars.com/resources, lots of resources for you there. And now we've learned that Heiner's classicalchinesemedicine.org has incredible resources, as well as his herb line has people there available and ready to support you. So I want to give a little bit of introduction, and then Heiner, please, I'll have you let people know, because some people may not know who you are. So share some of your background, and then give us your pearls, because our talk today is Chinese medicine response to COVID-19, a summary of treatment approaches used in China. And I do want to start with our disclaimer that this is for educational purposes only. This is not medical advice. This is not to be intended or interpreted as medical advice. If you have a health condition, you need to seek out a healthcare provider. This is for educational purposes only. And so I've known Heiner for a while. I've learned from Heiner. I've seen him he's taught, so I've taken courses. I've moderated courses because he has several healthy seminars. I've seen him speak around the globe. And we've been at conferences where we just talked and spoke. And it's been great to have you, Heiner, on our site. And just the information that you keep putting out through your assets, your websites, has been phenomenal. And I saw what you were talking about on one of your articles, and talking with respect to your teacher, because there's actual experience what's happening. And I invited you, and you are so busy. Like, I know so many of us are all busy. So Heiner is very busy. And I just, asked if he would be willing to share, because we just kind of want to know, because we don't know what narrative to believe. Do we believe the media? Because we're doubting the media, and there's so much information. We don't want to get information from Facebook. And at least I know Heiner, so he's credible. I do trust Heiner. And he's one person removed from a lot of the people in China doing this work in China. And I thought it'd be great to have somebody like you come in and share with us what's happening. Is there any effectiveness to what you're seeing anecdotally, at least clinically, because there's not research that I'm aware of? And then what's our role as Chinese medicine practitioners for our families and friends and for the public? And then post-COVID, as in, if somebody's been infected, what do we have to offer after this? Because will people need our support? And those that want to do everything they can to be as healthy as possible, so if they do get infected by COVID or any other illness, what can we do to help our body so it can adapt and respond? Because that's the goal of Chinese medicine, right? Not to treat the virus as much as to treat the individual and how they present, so the body has its homeostasis and it can adapt and take up a relationship with it so it can survive and thrive. So without any further ado, Heiner, we are all ears, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so very much, Lauren, for inviting me again to speak on your forum, and thank all of you for joining this discussion from all over the world. I see also some familiar names and faces, so I'm very happy to see you all at this time. And I apologize for not doing the regular healthy seminars thing with lots of prep and slides, etc., because everything is, of course, still developing. So I hesitate to put things in that kind of a hard form of writing. And then secondly, we've been, as Lauren has mentioned, very busy, both with at the university doing all of this Zoom teaching, and in the private clinic, which is still legal to operate in Oregon, and then questions from practitioners all over the country. a few words, as Lauren has asked me to say a few self-introductory things. Where I'm coming from in this lecture, talking about what I know about the treatment of this disease in recent months in China, is that I'm primarily an herb nerd that wasn't originally trained that way. I was educated as a Chinese literature major in Germany, who then went to China in the early 80s, met my future wife there. We were all, we have 250,000 foreigners living in Shanghai at this point. At that point, there were 100 of us in 1982, and they all lived in the same building. So it's very easy to meet under those kinds of circumstances. And I then got my PhD at the University of Chicago in Chinese literature. And in the year that I was graduating, I was diagnosed with cancer as a young man at the age of 28. And that prompted me to kind of put the brakes on. And just like with this epidemic right now, I don't believe in coincidences. There's always some deeper, even though it's some things are shocking and bring us out of our regular routine. There's always something that, as catastrophic as it might be, that lets us reevaluate, in that case, my own life trajectory. And I decided at the beginning, just to go back to China for self-healing purposes and Qigong, etc. But I got very interested in, took, while there were no foreigners there, basically got private courses at the university, full Chinese medicine education over a period of 2+ years, and then never left the profession since coming back in 1984. Or not coming back, when I came back the second time was in 1992, and then founded the College of Classical Chinese Medicine at the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon, where I still teach full-time. But mostly I have maintained relationships with my teachers in China and friends and colleagues, and go back every year for about 6 weeks or so for the last 30 years. And those people are like family to me, and I'm in touch with them basically every day with one person or another. So that's kind of more from, there is some academic knowledge I can pass on, but there's also lots of just kind of atmospheric knowledge from what WeChat, etc. So the basic message I want to pass on, because this is the message that happened while we didn't have any COVID cases here, but started coming out of China as early as in February, is that Chinese medicine's methodology of of differential diagnosis for this disease works just the same as for any other disease. It's not some kind of extraterrestrial thing that where all of a sudden you use the pulse pattern and symptoms, and your acupuncture treatment, your herbal treatment doesn't work. Quite the opposite. It is contrasted, however, by this, this anxiety and not knowing and spinning of the wheels of Western medicine in China as well as over here. So I think this is a moment of opportunity for seeing, what is the nature of our profession, particularly history of our profession, because I believe that revisiting the classics, starting from the Neijing itself and going on to the Shanghanlun, that those were all written before the background of epidemics. They weren't like, sports injuries or you pull a tendon or so. It was all for serious types of diseases. And so books like the Shanghanlun really should be translated as treatise on epidemic disorders caused by cold influences, and so on, all the way up to the Wenyi the treatise on epidemic diseases, and the fever school classics, etc. They were all really specializing in the diagnosis and the treatment of these types of diseases. So we'll go into that a little bit more in detail in a moment. And so we, more than at any time, instead of retreating into the background, this is an opportunity for us to do our work, even if it is through telemedicine or so, if we so choose. But our methodology, does work. Of course, if you work through the telephone or through the video consult, then you would primarily need to work with herbs or teach the patient how to do acupressure on themselves. One reporter I greatly treasure is the New York Times reporter Nicholas Kristof. He also comes from what has become my home here, Oregon originally, and then is of course specializing in the Southeast Asia reporting. But a week ago or so, there was a video special where he visited the front lines in New York City hospital, and that was about the same kind of stuff that my friends who were in the hospital, Dr. Ding, Professor Lodi Hong, they're very close friends of mine, working in COVID wards in Wuhan, told me exactly the similar kinds of stories. You have this, tremendous amounts of technology and this hierarchical system where people are trained very in a sophisticated fashion and now fighting a battle, and it's very fine-tuned machine, as chaotic as it might have been. But he was like, of course, full of praise for the people who are risking their lives every day and are very professional. But he also, it's a very difficult thing to intubate somebody, to put him on a respirator, but particularly after hearing from months and months that the solution is to have millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to buy more respirators, to have that be the answer on the news, and then seeing that once you actually put people on the respirators, that 90% or so actually don't make it. So that was also in his report. So in the face of this situation, to have an instrumentation, both diagnostically, theoretically, as well as therapeutically, have that at your fingertips, that can explain a lot of these things that we see every day in the news. Why do people get weird rashes? Why do people get neurological symptoms? Why do people get shortness of breath? Why do people seem to have pneumonia, but you treat it like a regular pneumonia, it doesn't work? Why do some people have no respiratory symptoms, but they keel over and die, and then you discover blood clots? Those are all things that can be completely explained through the academic and diagnostic lens of our profession, in some instances as early as, in great detail, almost 2,000 years ago. So this is a moment to kind of better understand our profession, better understand some of the strange lines in the classics that we couldn't make sense of. Like yesterday, I was teaching a class on the pericardium, and there was I think it was PC 5 or 6 or so, the indications and the ABCs of acupuncture, the Zhenjiu Jiaijing, where the patient has a high fever, has enormous chest pain, and they laugh and they cannot stop. That is something that we've never seen a patient like that. And we see these things in ancient classics, but now that we're in the middle of this epidemic where people are not only having upper respiratory infections as severe as they might normally be with a regular influenza, we see where things go to the nervous system and where people exhibit strange behavior, like mentally confused, seizures, and maybe uncontrollable laughter, even though there is nothing to laugh about. That is sort of a definitely neurological thing, and a sign that the pericardium, fire organs, are involved here. and we can't just look at the metal lung and use simply diaphoretics to deal with this disease. So, and then of course, both in China as well as here, we see this focus on, everybody's racing to develop certain drugs or maybe a vaccine, and until then we all need to stay inside. Every day goes by, we see how the reality of that is becoming more and more realistic, and unless we want to stay for years inside, and we see this already in China, where for political purposes, okay, we all back to normal, and there is things now stuff is happening in the United States, and look at them, this is aggressive social media campaign that are, if not promoted, definitely allowed by the government. There's any post that doesn't suit the flavor gets within 5 minutes gets taken down, but those things don't get taken down, like the virus originated in the United States, and we barely had any dead people, and there's like they dying like flies in the West, and it's maybe because metal element, Western people simply have weak lungs. Those are definitely highly problematic, I think, in terms of being useful and believable there. But we also see, that now that China is opening, there's already a resurgence of a second wave coming as people starting to go out again. So us just getting locked up all the time and waiting for a vaccine and having a superstitious belief in the powers of science and Western medicine is, that's okay, that's great if people work on that, but that's not our discipline, so we shouldn't shut ourselves in our houses for several years, but should think about what can we do in our profession, what does our profession have to offer. And of course, one of the strongest things that our profession has is this alchemical view of the world, starting with heaven and earth intertwining to fuse to create the 10,000 things, but most importantly, external triggers meets internal terrain, and together that makes disease. It's never just an external thing. It's never just somebody says an angry word, and then somebody reacts to that, and that some people laugh at that, other people just contain it, other people radiate love back, and other people they feel they need to murder that person. So they're completely different reactions, and we see that also from many studies that have been done for ever since the 1918 flu epidemic, where science was trying to go like, what is causing the disease, and injecting viruses into people, blowing it into their noses, going very close. And some people get it and then other people don't, and never being able to say, it is this particular virus that is causing the disease. And of course, this disease, this coronavirus plays a role, but it can't explain why some people get life-threateningly ill really quickly, while other people don't have any symptoms at all, or maybe only have loss of smell or something, or just average kind of flu symptoms, or not even. Whereas this is, of course, very explainable from the Zheng Qi perspective of the righteous qi, our terrain, our defense energy in Chinese medicine. And the Neijing is talking about what we need to guard against is the xu xie zei feng. So it's the opportunity. It's not just any wind, any infection, any external pathogen that causes disease or epidemic disease, but it is a opportunistic, a thieving wind that takes advantage of a pre-existing deficiency in the patient. Therefore, xu xie, a deficiency, that internal deficiency that needs to meet with an external pathogen, and then creates a fusion where the immune system is overwhelmed and then creates these massive what they call cytokine storms and this autoimmune complication, where it is really not in the end the virus, but our own over-challenged immune system that is overreacting and freaking out and causing the danger. So those are all very things to consider at the get-go. So let's start by going into the, and this is, my dear colleagues and friends in China, like especially Dr. Liu Hong, who wrote this very influential book, 思考中医, translated as classical Chinese medicine, that just came out last year by Hong Kong University Press. So that's sort of a manifesto of, the science of ancient principles of Chinese medicine that is not based necessarily on modern Western medicine integration, Chinese medicine integration ideology that is often used in modern Chinese TCM hospitals. So he and other people, including some of the materials that me and some of my colleagues have translated in recent weeks, and that's up at that COVID page on classicalchinesemedicine.org, they point out that many chapters in the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's classical medicine from more than 2,000 years ago, are relevant, specific for the treatment of epidemic disease, specifically chapter 69 through 74, where the Wu Yun Liu Qi are discussed, the kind of 5 energetic influences in the heavens that then cause 6 different weather patterns on Earth, where there's constantly certain influences in excess and deficiency in a 60-year cycle. And in there very specifically is the word 不时之气, I believe it is, which means unseasonal energetics. So that means what creates the temporal terrain for an epidemic to develop is when it's wintertime and should be cold, but now it's warm instead, or when it's springtime and it should be warming up, but it's getting cold instead. And this is, of course, what we had this year, because in the 60-year cycle, this is the year that is most vulnerable, most strange in the wintertime. I'm not so much of a Wu Yin Liu Qi expert, so I can only point that out what my colleagues who know more about that have said, both in the United States as well as in China, is that the energetic characteristic of this year, which is last year was the year of the pig, right? And then the year of the rat right now, they are essentially at the bottom of the holo map. If you imagine sort of a yin-yang sign with yang, white rising on the left and yin, black coming down on the right, and you have the 12 months of the year or the 12-year cycle around that, or the 12 organ networks around that, and then 12 so-called tidal hexagrams around that, where the yang, 1 yang, 2 yang, 3 yang, 4 yang, 5 yang is building up all the way to hexagram 1 in the first months of summer. That goes with the spleen, or the time from 9 to 11 a.m. And then the yin increasing at the summer solstice and going all the way to 6 yin in the position of the first months of winter, the so-called 10th months of the year, which is approximately beginning of November to beginning of December, when hexagram 2 is basically 6 yin lines. So they are indicative of this, basically in the spring and summer, or during the morning and the day, the yang qi comes out of the box. And then during the fall and winter, the yang qi goes below ground, goes into storage. And there is no greater storage than in the late fall or the early winter time. the 9th, 10th, and 11th months of the year. And so we are in a year with the year of the pig and the year of the rat, where we basically hexagram 23 going into hexagram 2, one indicating the time for 7 to 9 p.m., or the 8th months of the year. That's the pericardium is associated with that in Chinese medicine, the microcosm of the body. And then the triple warmer, which is hexagram 2, 9 to 11 p.m. And then, of course, going into the hexagram 24, which is indicative of the return of the yang qi, but in the year of the rat that we're in right now. But basically, all three of those, but with hexagram 2, with going with the triple warmer, is a symbol that this entire time, especially the end of last year, particularly the winter time, was a time when normally the yang qi should be in a state of storage. That means all of the warmth is below ground. So the winter should be colder than any other time because the yang qi is more solidly stored than any other time. However, because of the special complication of what other guest qi there was and where the heavenly stems were, etc., we have a situation where last winter, at least certainly was true in Oregon, was warmer than any other time. We didn't have snow. I live in the Columbia River Gorge, granted not very high, about 720 feet high, but I'm only 45 minutes away from Mount Hood, where the national ski team very often is training, because it's one of the very few mountains in the United States where you have snow all the way on the glacier into the summertime. So we get at least 3 days of snow or so in the wintertime. There was no snow, no ice during the entire winter, because there was the kidney of nature didn't do this good job to pull the yang qi into a state of storage. And it was floating and hovering at the top. And that then can, of course, so that was one unseasonal type of qi. And then we're coming into the springtime, and which should be warm. And instead of getting warm, yes, there were a couple of days and the flowers started to bloom, and they're in bloom right now, but where we had weeks and weeks of hail in April. So it was the opposite, that we got this kind of a cold time in the spring and the warm time in the winter time. So both of these were the beginning of the year of the rat and the end of the year of the pig, very unseasonal. And the Neijing lets us know right away that that is dangerous for the development of epidemic diseases. Of course, particularly pig and rat, in the system of 12 meridians, they would go specifically with the Shaoyang organs, triple warmer and gallbladder. And I find from where I'm sitting and what I'm observing, particularly in this country, that whether it is regular flu, at least in Oregon, we sort of underprivileged state, there seems to be no testing available. Even if you send people, there is never any, stay home, you're not sick enough. So nobody knows, whether they've been exposed. So we just go do our regular thing, COVID or not. We treat you based on the symptoms, since we're not in the business of treating any specific viruses to begin with. But we also seeing people, of course, or hear about people that get treated with Chinese medicine in New York or so that have been COVID tested positive. And so we find that the Shaoyang, no matter what people have, the Shaoyang component is in common in all of those. So chaihu is an incredibly important herb, the plum, in addressing that from at least the limited experience I have, not so much with COVID, but just with this ichi, with this kind of lingering pestilence energy that seems to be in the atmosphere right now, whether it gives us COVID-19 or gives us something else, but that lingering kind of sticky quality where people relapse and for months and months it doesn't get better, and you know, feel under the weather, fatigue every time you think you're better, it keeps coming back, seems to be what is happening. All right, number 2, from the Neijing going on to the Shanghan Lun. The Shanghan Lun is, of course, a magnificent work that gives us very concrete indications, not just what kind of meridians there are, you know, really the 6 conformations, the Liu Jing Bianzheng, the differential diagnostic system that originated with the Shanghan Lun according to the 6 different differently paired meridian systems that are different than the meridian system pairs we have in the 5 element systems, looking at the same organ clock from a different perspective, therefore, is also, of course, a roadmap of how particularly epidemic disease moves from the surface, particularly starting with the Taiyang channel and going deeper to the Yangming and Shaoyang, and then going deeper into the yin channels and causing more life-threatening damage there, particularly if you go all the way to the Juyin and Shaoyin, to the pericardium, to the heart, to the kidneys, that we hear about now in the news so much. The one other thing, though, that's been forgotten, and it's credit to Liu Lihong, who is one of the main Shanghan Lun experts in China. He in the encyclopedia in the Zhongyi Dadian, in the Great Encyclopedia of Chinese Medicine, the government commissioned him to write the entry on the Shanghan approach to disease. And since he's written his doctoral dissertation many decades ago about that, and his book Classical Chinese Medicine that I just showed you is also at the core very much about the Shanghan Lun approach to disease in general. He pointed out in his many blog posts and lectures that he has delivered and made available to the Chinese-speaking audience, and some of that translated by us, is that what's been overlooked in many annotated translations, certainly in English, is the preface that precede the Taiyang chapter in the Shanghan Lun, called Shanghan Li, which means examples of Shanghan disease, where it basically points out that particularly in the context of epidemic disease, there is not such a neat progression where we go from Taiyang, it resolves in the Taiyang, becomes a Yangming, it resolves in the Yangming, goes to the Shaoyang, it resolves in the Shaoyang, goes to the Taiyin, etc. But there is this 3 different concepts of complexity syndrome are being introduced, one of them being hebing, that could be translated as combined disease or complexity syndrome, I favor, which is basically the simultaneous, right from the get-go, immediately you get Taiyang and Yangming together, or Taiyang and Yangming, Taiyang and Shaoyang together, or Taiyang and Yangming and Shaoyang all at the same time. Furthermore, he points out something that he felt like you see or that he saw personally once he went to Wuhan a lot when he studied the disease histories. There is also Bingbing, that which is called Bingbing, which means simultaneous affliction, which means instead of resolving into Taiyang and then moving on to the Yangming or the Shaoyang, it starts with the Taiyang, but then goes on to linger in the Taiyang while simultaneously then also going deeper into the Shaoyang. So rather than resolving in the surface, going deeper and be only present in the Shaoyang, you have Taiyang, Yangming, Shaoyang all of a sudden all there at the same time. Technically similar to the hebing, but they have a different technical term here called bingbing, the kind of simultaneous affliction. And then there's finally lianggan, which means dual affliction, and that is specifically referring to yang problems and yin problems being present at the same time. So you have maybe taiyang and yangming at the same time, plus taiyin, maybe juyin, maybe shaoyin involved at the same time. So if yin and yang channels together form a complexity syndrome, then the word for that would be lianggan. So he kind of, in all of his lectures, brings his own colleagues back to the roots, reminds them, let's not just wait for Western medicine to kind of give us pointers that we then use. The minute we have a symptom, we can treat, and it makes us understand certain chapters that even he said, I'm Shangan expert. In a certain way, it doesn't get any more expert than that. I never really fully, I did read the Shangan Li chapter. I never fully understood what it was talking about, but now I really do. I personally also found, and these are mostly articles coming out of the Shanghai Southeast China region, sort of more the kind of damp heat kind of region that favors fever school approaches. Dr. Liu Linhong, of course, is a disciple of the so-called Huoshen Pai of the fire spirit school, using cinnamon, ginger, aconite, working with these more warm and aromatic substances that he felt were helpful in the treatment of this disease. Whereas we see more like these kind of aromatic but more bland and temperature neutral types of herbs being used, based on Wu Youke's 16th century work, Wen Yi Lun, the treatise on epidemic pestilence, which was exclusively, and this is another thing we need to remember, that we basically have Chinese medicine doctors repeatedly treat hundreds, if not thousands of people in the course of an epidemic, and have like no astronaut equipment, no protective gear, no masks, and then live to tell the tale and write a book about that later and go on to live until their 90s or so. And we are not just talking about COVID-19 like diseases, which of course is very serious, but I would think that something like the bubonic plague or Ebola or something like this is much more severe with enormous death rates, and that these people were sitting there in these kind of environments where people queue up and kind of vomiting blood, and next, okay, like no disinfection wipes or so. So I feel ashamed when my colleagues from China now, after I've asked them for months, how are you guys doing? What can we do? Now they asking us every day, what's going on? Should we, send you some masks? There is like, oh, you are on the front lines. I'm treating some people, but it's not, I'm sitting on 30 acres in the state of Oregon that has very few, with a very intelligent, educated population, and I'm even if I see a lot of patients, then I see 8 or 9 people a day. I don't see hundreds of people who cough or vomit blood on me, and so I it's anybody is in comparison to what people did in the past. None of us, can be a hero in that way, and so just that is very inspiring to me, to kind of read also classics that are not so famous, like the fever school classics, where they're more colloquial language during the Qing dynasty, where there's pulmonary plagues from 1910 or so, where 60,000 people died in Manchuria, what used to be Manchuria in northern China, and just like people describe the kind of mayhem and that was happening at that time, and how these people were at the front lines. And then, of course, we have, out of Wu Youke's effort came the so-called fever school approach that started with the famous Dr. Ye Tianshi, late Ming Dynasty, early Qing Dynasty, 1700s, who that then ended up being written up, systematized his case studies in the Wenbing Tiaobian by Wu Jitong, or Wu Tang as he's sometimes called, which is this system, this kind of Wei Qi Yingxue diagnostic system, which is another Shanghan Lun-like system from the Wei layer to the Qi layer, to the Yin layer, to the blood layer. This is how epidemic diseases progress. And just using different kinds of herbs while still utilizing Shanghan Lun remedies, there is sort of something that I learned from that approach, and particularly learned from one of my teachers in Xi'an, called Wu Sheng'an, who was a Shanghan Lun master, but favored in some words in his own clinical practice herbs that are bland and aromatic, so that those are mostly fever school herbs, like in Yin Qiao San, that you can give to children. They're very safe to use. It's not like ephedra, ma huang, but they can solve serious diseases like encephalitis, meningitis. We have lots of reports of that, about that from the past. So I think the fever school, there's lots to learn, particularly since their specialties treat epidemic disease, in some cases with some very food grade kind of approaches that don't immediately harm your stomach very intensely. Another thing we can learn from is, of course, that this is not the first coronavirus epidemic. We had the SARS in 2003, 17 years ago. And we have the efforts of Deng Tietao, who lived to the age of 102 or 3, who just passed away in the spring of last year, and who I visited with some colleagues to speak about his experience in the epidemic. You can also see sort of an hour and a half visit with him recorded on video. We made that available for free to honor him, but also to make some of his, in his own words, available what his experience was in the SARS epidemic, at least. And one of the papers that we've put up online is this here, that comes from Shanxi University of Traditional Chinese Medicine and Pharmacology, a paper that's in English translation entitled "A Discussion of Traditional Chinese Medicine Diagnosis and Treatment Approaches to COVID-19 based on the experience of Chinese medicine expert Deng Tietao during the SARS epidemic." So this paper is up on the COVID page at classicalchinesemedicine.org, and has not only is the SARS genome 80% identical to this coronavirus, but also the symptoms very similar. In a certain way, SARS was even more intense than this one, had a higher death rate of 10% or so. And so there's lots to learn from. And interestingly, though, that he was asked and allowed to only at the very end of the SARS epidemic, which was exclusively battled with Western medicine at the time. And I remember that very clearly because I was slated to bring a group of 30 people to China, and my university president at the time didn't allow us to go. And but so I could just stay up on the news all the time until it finally blew over, and we went, since that was, we went in the summertime. But so he documented in the late stages of this epidemic that while people were dying in great numbers in the hospital, a Western medicine hospital, that in his hospital he achieved the three nothings: no infection of hospital staff by taking preventatively Chinese medicine herbs. And I should say this, these are of course anecdotal, but there is Professor Hu Changjiang, who is a senior professor at Chengdu University of TCM, who is not only a excellent pharmacologist teaching in the pharmacology department there, but is China's one of the two top experts on Paozhi. He's actually the Paozhi advisor for all of our classical pearls remedies, where about half of the herbs used in there are Paozhi processed according to classical principles. But he's also a believer, and particularly for pharmacologists at Chinese medicine universities, this is not normally the case, is a believer in the traditional science of diagnosis and treatment, and sort of as a hobby has his own clinic treating people and specializing in serious diseases. And so he had, at the time when this was acute, 30 patients he'd seen in the past who asked him to prescribe preventative prescriptions based on Yuping Fengshan, jade screen powder, but lots of other kinds of herbs in there, like that are more diaphoretic, like Lonicera, Forsythia, also antitoxin, antiviral, like Guanzhong, the Dryopteris, particularly the hardy fern root. And so the very complex remedy with 15 different things. And people who were literally stapled in their department, after the Chinese government didn't want to do anything similar to here, so we can't, the finger pointing doesn't do anything because nobody really knew what this was. And, we still had on January the 20th or so, when people had already blown the whistle and people were knowing that there was an epidemic, there were still gatherings of tens of thousands of people for Chinese New Year in Wuhan. But then all of a sudden, when the Chinese CDC became involved and the leadership very quickly made a decision to swing the other direction and then radically close down the country, you had people who were then immediately, you were arrested if you weren't wearing a mask on a bus, for instance, or if you were tested positive, you just to make sure you stay inside. In certain districts, the local leaders made the decision to literally staple the door in. So at the time you had lots of videos where people were outraged, but then immediately government censors would take that down off WeChat. But my Chinese friends, they're on their phones all the time. So particularly social distancing, there was nothing else to do. So they kind of gave me this kind of live stream information a lot. So really draconian kind of measures. And so there were lots of, so they had food through a slot in the door there. And this is not all people, of course. And where you had infected and verified COVID-19 positive people together with other members of the family that were locked in the same apartment that is not thousands of square feet, but everybody is still eating together, etc. And they were taking these remedies, and not a single family member, based on somebody who is an academic, is in his 60s, is a very trustworthy individual, said got sick from that. So we know that this is completely plausible, not just at Deng Jietao's time, but also nowadays. The second nothing was nobody got nobody got worse. So that means nobody had to, you come to the hospital and you have a high fever, but you never go into this severe state where you have heart failure and need to be put on a ventilator or so, and then, or need to be transferred to a Western medicine ICU. So that was the second nothing. And the third nothing, nobody died, which is none of the other hospitals achieved that. So after that, Deng Jiatao was already famous, was for a long time the most famous Chinese medicine doctor, not only because he was very humble, not only because he had already written letters to Mao Zedong himself decades before, urging them to not throw out the baby with the bathwater and honor the traditional ways of diagnosing with Chinese medicine. And, just a very, if you watch his interview with him, you can just see what a great individual he is. And of course, he himself entirely, every day doing Tai Chi, doing Chinese medicine dietetics, never taking any Western drugs himself, and then making it to a ripe Sun Sum Yao age or even beyond to live to 103. He's really an excellent model for what you can do if you actually walk your talk. So he's a formidable influence, but nevertheless, we come now into the year 2020 and all of these lessons been somewhat forgotten. And the Chinese government is now shutting everything down. And a person called Zhong Nanshan, who's sort of the equivalent of Anthony Fauci here in the US, comes on board, who experienced the SARS epidemic. He's a Western medicine epidemiologist, but his daughter got SARS and was actually saved by Chinese medicine. So in the beginning, there was still, again, only Western medicine used, but because of Zhong Nanshan's personal experience with the number 3 or 4 edition, remember that everything in China is political, whether it's poetry or medicine, there needs to be one standardized approach. You can't just say, I'll do this and I'll do that. So even in Chinese medicine, which is supposed to use differential diagnosis, there was one government approach. Every hospital needs to treat these people like this. And then every few days or every week or so would be updated. Version 1, only Western medicine. Version 2, only Western medicine. Throwing like anti-AIDS drugs, anti-viral medication at the patient doesn't work. And then starting with version 3 or 4, starting to use Chinese medicine, standardized Chinese medicine for the most part. In the beginning, just 1 or 2 remedies that then got expanded to more and more remedies in version 5, 6, and 7 in different stages. So it got more sophisticated, and particularly one remedy that's been lots studied, and you can look that up. It's called Qing Fei Pai Du Tang, which is clear heat in the lung and push out toxin decoction, which is an incredibly complex remedy with 17 or 18 different herbs that actually does use Shanghai Lun formulas for the most part, but then uses them in ways that you would not normally use them, namely by using the Yangming remedy, Ma Xing Shi Gan Tang, ephedra, apricot seed, gypsum, and licorice decoction, together with the Shaoyang remedy, Xiao Chai Hu Tang, minor bupleurum decoction, together with Wuling San, which is arguably in the Taiyang chapter there, but it's a more internal, usually used as a diaphoretic, not a diaphoretic, as a diuretic remedy. So sort of a smorgasbord of Taiyang, Yangming, Shaoyang all at the same time together. But we've already heard from this kind of Hebing, Bingbing, Lianggan approach that this is indeed what is what the characteristic of this epidemic is, not just in the past at Zhang Zhongjing's time, but in the case of this particular virus. They put up lots of, in most cases, these people were now treated with Western medicine plus Chinese herbs at the same time. And so we see lots of studies now that are like, how is Western medicine by itself, and how did these people fare that did the standardized Western medicine protocol at the same time? And very clearly, they are doing better. And I personally more interested in what happened for political or necessity reasons, perhaps because there were so many cases there. And I simply, this is, of course, I'm not an expert on that at all, but the numbers that come out of China are absolutely to be taken with a grain of salt. As I said, so many things in China are political, even poetry is political, and certainly reporting of disease numbers, you could see if it was like, oh, let's think of opening, the official disease numbers went down. Oh, let's think of, oh, it's more serious again, we need to keep closed. The official disease numbers then went up or so to fit that official narrative. So I think as time will progress, we'll see, because it's not possible that you have, not closing down for several months. We know now this virus has been in China since September, and it wasn't closed, there was in circulation for 3 months, similar to what it was in United States, where, beginning of January, before we only now in April are starting to do distancing. And you have this enormous infection rate and death rate that's not possible in a country that has 5 times as many people to have so many less infected people than here, So we'll need to wait and see what comes out of that. But I personally interested as a Chinese medicine physician is how does Chinese medicine does on its own. So there were few places, so-called Fangqiang Yuan, which was rapidly erected, so-called container hospitals, where it was all hands on deck, where there was only Chinese medicine crew, and they would use some Western medicine drugs, but there was not a single Western medicine physician. Every Chinese medicine physician in China needs to learn some Western medicine, but they were primarily using acupuncture. They were primarily using Tai Chi and Qigong, and they were primarily using Chinese herbs. And they were also achieving, and we need to wait and see whether this is indeed true, the 3 nothings, like that no staff members got infected. Everybody mandatorily had to drink Chinese herbal decoctions. Nobody got worse, and nobody died in those hospitals. So that is while they're not tens of thousands of people, but they still had 200 staff people and 600 patients or so. That is a relatively large population to be studied, So while they were primarily using a more standardized approach, as recommended in government editions 5, 6, and 7, that you can see some of, particularly in the article here that is entitled coming out of published by Chinese Archives for Traditional Chinese Medicine, translated into Expert Consensus Statement on the Prevention, Diagnosis, and Treatment of COVID-19 Infection in Children, also up on the classicalchinesemedicine.org COVID page. What you have in there, and I didn't repeat it in some of the others because it's after a while gets boring because just repetitive. It's while this seems to be about children, you can see there it's the same approach is true for adults. That is basically a reflection of version 7 of the government approach. Stage number 1, stage number 2, people with diarrhea, people more severely ill with high fever, people who need to go on the respirator and go into heart failure. So you have these different stages. And so you see the government approach reflected in there. Then we have these reports of more from my friends, and they are less numerous because you can't Google them, because these are extremely restricted, because basically you have so-called 民间医生, which is folk physicians, meaning private physicians that go and volunteer to go into the front line, into Wuhan, and finding this extremely difficult, because you can read in this very heartfelt and incredibly detailed report. It's the transcript. We've been working day and night at the time several weeks ago to put this together. The transcript of and translation of his video lecture that he delivered to his originally faculty and friends at his alma mater, Chengdu University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, where he got his master's degree. A 2-hour lecture online delivered from his hotel room in Wuhan, entitled The Role of Chinese Medicine in the COVID-19 Epidemic. So while that's also up on the COVID page of classicalchinesemedicine.org, and is like a good 25 pages long. And you find a link if you want to see Dr. Liu Lihong speaking with Mask et al. Directly from Wuhan. That's also now, there's a link to YouTube where with the subtitle, this entire script, these entire 25 pages are below him speaking, so you can, if you prefer watching a video more than reading something. But this is not only a vintage Liu Lihong, waxing philosophically, encouraging his profession to believe in the efficacy of this medicine, talking about what kind of Shanghai methods and what kind of acupuncture methods he finds are useful, but also describing in a very detailed form that you don't find because it's too controlled, what China looked like during the lockdown. It was, he said it was like Wuhan was like a ghost town. We were riding in our car and there were all of these lines of car. Nobody was allowed to go into Wuhan. And there are these people in full astronaut gear. That was totally scary for us to go in there. And then we were trained for 3 days how to wear the same astronaut gear before we were allowed to go into the treatment rooms, etc., and see these people. And then describing how here, senior Chinese medicine physician, arguably one of the top 2 or 3 famous Chinese medicine doctors, or most famous Chinese medicine doctors in China, it's a household name there, is admitting that he says, until I put my first needle in the first patient, and that person went, oh my God, what just happened? I've been here for 2 months and I didn't get any better. And now after the first needle, because, while he's technically an internal medicine doctor, it took them like a couple of days to get herbs because everything was shut down. They started with acupuncture, and the first needle, the patient had immediate results. And here's Dr. Liu Lihong, professor, doctor, so-and-so, writing this best-selling book and being on all of these academies and TV interviews all the time, who is admitting and said, I felt like a little kid. I was like so scared that everything I had learned before, while I'm preaching about this all the time, that it wouldn't work. That I would do something and the patient would just say, this just hurts, or nothing happening. And here was this dramatic result with the very first patient. And he said that needle opened up that patient's chest, but more importantly, it opened up the heart of our team, because we all were afraid that our modalities wouldn't work. And the minute that happened, we let that worry go and started treating just like our bread and butter diagnostics. And we saw it work, both the acupuncture and the herbs. And yes, there were some things we hadn't seen before, like people get better and then they relapse, and had to learn something from that. But it was truly not any, the basically immediate results there. So he's also talking about going deeper in his later writings about it's not, don't just fixate on the virus. After 5 weeks being in the hospital, being in quarantine, it was just as difficult for him as a private doctor to go out of Wuhan as going into there. He's then writing about saying, what does this virus mean? We need to have a different approach. Like Lauren was saying at the very beginning, this is not, our profession is not in the business of identifying certain viruses and then killing them off. It's about finding a syndrome approach that is based on what's the climate this year, what's the atmospheric energetics, and how does that go together with a particular pestilential chi that has a common characteristic. And number three, then how does that alchemically fuse with the constitution of the patient? So that was sort of like, Dr. Liu Lihong's pep talks here. And then you see, if you're interested more in the fever school approach, you have a great summary of that in this article called The Dampness Epidemic, Exploring the Clinical Characteristics of COVID-19 in Shanghai, also up on the same site. Which is basically, I left the treatment experience out because it's just a reiteration of what is in that COVID in children approach. But this article is spending considerably more time in exploring the background of COVID from an epidemic writing and fever school perspective, and is rather than approaching it like from a herbal complexity syndrome perspective, as Liu Lihong did when he discussed the Shanghai Nun approach, saying this disease is basically a combination of cold, particularly of damp, like the whole title is the Dampness Epidemic, right? This is something you've all heard by now already, how this pathogen, everybody is damp on some level, and that's why it's this sticky and hard to leave. And then on the basis of this dampness, there might be stagnation, and there might be heat or damp heat. And of course, there is the complication of du, which is toxicity. So you can't just use diaphoretics, you can't just clear heat, but you need to use particularly antitoxin herbs. Toxin means life-threatening, potentially super quick developments, etc. And then it's talking about the importance of complexity. In addition to talking about this complexity, is the importance of talking about in stages. So at the very end, I want to talk a little bit about my own experience here in the US, while again, because of the limited amounts of patients we see here ourselves, can again only talk about some of my students or telemedicine with people in New York and the people we see here with symptoms but not confirmed. But I find that particularly one thing that is extremely important is this complexity. So you can't use a regular remedy like guizhi tang or ma huang tang or gugen tang or xiao chai hu tang or simple yin xiao san to treat this disease in the Taiyang or Shaoyang layer, but right away you need to something that's much more complex. And I find there is 3 categories that are important. And the number 1 category is the Taiyang Yangming category that includes some Tai-Yin aspects, and that would be the category I would classify as treating using aromatic herbs that have a diaphoretic effect and kill the snake. And that term, kill the snake, or 杀蛇发表, kill the snake with diaphoretic herbs, you find in my writings about Gu syndrome. And so the Jiajian Suhe Tang, where I've lectured and written about, modified perilla and mint decoction, which is a specialty decoction from the Qing dynasty, later then turned into these formulas, thunder pearls and lightning pearls that we've been using a lot, is for this approach. Like I personally thought we had a 2-year supply. All of a sudden, it's dwindled down to a 2-month supply. So this created panic because you can't get any. Factories are working again, but there are no planes coming out of China. And so it's extremely difficult to think about, sending planes through Arab countries, and you just be able to make sure we and other companies have enough supply for that. But I indeed find the Gu syndrome approach extremely useful. So immersing yourself in the Gu literature, and I've given again lately, did another, I think Better Health Guy or so also did a special talk about that. And of course, I should mention I did in my many recordings with Lauren and Healthy Seminars, at the time still called ProD seminars, we have especially recordings about approaching this, a very extremely most relevant, because I believe this virus, with all of its later chronic manifestations especially, needs to be addressed as a Gu syndrome. So inside of these, the most important category, or in this Gu approach, is the combination of aromatic herbs that resolve the surface but are not abrasive like mahuang ephedra, like what they use primarily in China, but uses common herbs that are almost food grade, like honeysuckle. It's called honeysuckle Jinihua on purpose because it's not harming the qi of the spleen. Forsythia lianxiao, Baizhi angelica dahurica, Zisuye, perilla leaf, bohe mint, those kinds of herbs that you can use for longer periods of time, but then pairing those kinds of herbs with internal herbs that nourish the yin and the blood and the qi, but are also aromatic and therefore killing pathogens rather than tonifying the virus or other kinds of pathogens like funguses or spirochetes in the process. Secondly, and most important here though, there needs to be a Chaihu approach. So together with one of these Gu remedies, we've been using thunder pearls or lightning pearls, or Jiajian Suhe Tang if you would prescribe that custom, together with Xiao Chaihu Tang, for instance, minor bupleurum, with Chai Ge Jiji Tang, which is bupleurum plus Pueraria resolve the muscle layer decoction, particularly when there's high fever and body pain. You find that also in Deng Jie Tao's SARS approach very prominently. And Chai Hu Guizhi Ganjiang Tang, particularly people who normally need a cinnamon, but now it's this kind of sticky damp pathogen that for sure also afflicts the Shaoyang layer no matter who you are, kind of using Chai Hu and Guizhi together with these aromatic, more fever school-oriented herbs. By the way, Yin Xiao San can go along also with that thunder lightning or Jiajian Suhe Tang category. So we've got category number 1, aromatic herbs that resolve the surface, that you can take over longer periods of time, that kill parasites though that are deep in the blood, that can cause damage to deeper organs, and are tonic at the same time, mostly addressing Taiyang, Yangming, and Taiyin at the same time, and then having these Shaoyang remedies like Xiao Chaihu, Chaihu Guizhi Ganjiang, Chaihu Chaige Jiji Tang, or East Pearls, Release Pearls, that kind of thing in this other series. So they need to be paired. And number 3, And I'm particularly, at the beginning, I didn't really know what that was a part. I was mostly by just feeling pulses, which is a kind of too high pulse in the kidney position, which is usually an indication of kidney deficiency, where you need to, and I wasn't until I read Liu Lihong's papers there about, how in the Wuhan Liu Qi system, the kidneys are compromised and are not storing. So it's almost like everybody right now, because of general atmospherics, is kidney deficient and the energy is hovering above, and therefore also energy comes up here, and everybody has the chest oppression symptoms. So other than kind of resolving the Shaoyang, and you need to pull energy down from the kidneys, but instead of using aconite right away, as in Qianyangdan, submerge the young pellet from the fire spirit school, or using dihuang, using sticky 24 grams of sticky Romania for somebody who's most likely damp, to consolidate the kidneys more with a kidney yin tonic herb, using feng shui dan, seal in the marrow decoction, with herbs like philodendron and amomum or cardamom that can not only consolidate the kidney but can clear damp heat also. So we've been using things like like in terms of gram amounts of, or capsule amounts, sort of using 3 xiao chai hu with 2 jia jian su he tang in the form of thunder or lightning, plus 1 feng shui dan, and then using that not once, not twice, but 3 or 4 times a day, even throughout the night, and then feel like that people's fever very often gets resolved during the night, and people instantly start feeling better. But then one needs to stay on it, even if it's just been taken 3 times a day, and eventually twice a day, and eventually once a day. Having that be taken almost over a whole month after you had a serious disease, COVID or not, you feel like this is intense, and I have this, telltale symptoms of tightness in the chest, etc. But you can see, with that rather than people getting worse and worse, they get better and then stay the same, and you need to stay on it. But it's not this dramatic kind of tanking and then cytokine storm and having these massive autoimmune kind of complications. So you can observe that at the at the classicalprose.org support forum, where there is lots of literature, also people asking questions. If you want to know more, how much, when, how many, those kinds of things, we don't have the time to go in here, but there is sort of more information about that there. And of course you can ask additional questions there, but just to point out additional support there from our side, or from me personally in the future. The one thing that I haven't seen is, because we're trying to avoid getting the patient to that state, and of course those people are all in the hospital where it's probably not allowed to take Chinese herbs or other natural medicine modalities. But theoretically, these complications of why are there blood clots? Why is there kidney failure? Those are typical kind of Shaoyang disease, Taiyang Shaoyang disease, Yangming disease, collapsing into the Juyin pericardium and now becoming life-threatening. And now you're getting yin and blood layer problems from the fever school diagnostic perspective. And you then need to use other and have Shaoyin issues as well. So you need to start using aconite perhaps, need to move the blood with danshen perhaps, and get Shulao symptoms, maybe these kind of wasting symptoms. You use maybe stuff like Dahuang Zhechongwan, possibly when there are blood clots or so, but those are patients we don't have experiences, but just looking at the, or heart pearls in the, but these are, our job is not treating those kind of patients. Our job is more preventing people, whether they have COVID or not, to to take into consideration what is the damp and the Shaoyang characteristic of this pathogen at this particular time, and how does it interact with the specific patient, and then treat them individually, stay on top of it, prevent that, and cause sort of a three nothings, and then more academically ponder what one would be using with Chinese medicine. And something that we see already is there is a huge role, of course, of Chinese medicine, even more so, is in the chronic recovery. If there is like 50,000 dead people out there, there means there is hundreds of thousands of people who are recovered and now have chronic lung, heart, kidney damage, where Western medicine says that'll always stay like that. I've seen a report from Innsbruck of 6 healthy Navy divers who all had mild symptoms, but had these glass shards in their lungs on the x-rays, and they all recovered and went back to work, and now not a single one of them can dive, and their physician says, you have permanent lung damage, you'll never be able to dive. So those kinds of like this kind of fibrosis of the lung, and like myocarditis and kidney damage recovery patients, we will be seeing a lot in the future. And there might even be some of us who will be making a living by specializing for many, many years of treating nothing but that, and having a full clinic. And so remedies that tonify the yin and the qi and the yang of the lung, heart, and kidneys will be particularly important there. But I just wanted to also give an opportunity to ask some questions. And sorry, I've been talking longer than I planned, and there's more to say. And I've tried to jam as much academic, but also hopefully some useful information for you into there. And hand it back to you, Lauren, here. And
Heiner, thank you. Thank you very much. So appreciative. And again, you're so busy to take the time. Heiner shared with us many resources, so please do check those out. We're going to get people to raise their hand digitally, and our system will put you in order. I think for you, it'll always look like you're at the top of the list, but for us, it actually gives us in the order you raise your hand. So as we see the hands raised, we're going to go to those and give you mic rights and take some questions. I want to remind you guys, again, it's for educational purposes only. When you're asking your questions, do be specific. I saw a question there about they have COVID symptoms. That doesn't exist. What's the presentation that you're seeing? Because that's how Chinese medicine works. It does not treat COVID. It treats the individual and what they're presenting with. So let's get ready to open up some mic if there's some questions there. Heiner, a question I have, and we've seen this on other talks, is in China and in your practice, is there a certain form of herbal herbs that are necessary? Like, does it have to be decoction, or can it be powder, or can it be pills? Does the style of the herbs matter? And are you finding that the formulas have to change quite rapidly, since some of the patient's symptoms change rapidly?
No, I don't think that matters so much. We also see in China that a lot of, they reporting now that 87% of COVID patients there were eventually treated with Chinese medicine, because that became mandatory. That, of course, doesn't really mean they were differentially diagnosed, and it doesn't mean you got like a decoction, or it just means there was some, you, among other things, also got some kind of patent remedy, and one doesn't know about the quality of that. So, I mean, I myself, after being sort of a diehard herbalist that only used traditional crude herb decoctions for everybody for years in my own practice, once that after SARS actually became the herbs, all of a sudden there were much stricter rules around that, and the price jumped dramatically of crude herbs, where something like Jinyinhua went from $3 a kilogram, which is almost nothing, like a big bag of honeysuckle for $3 American, then all of a sudden jumping to $25 and more thereafter. Wholesale price is quite expensive, and so there were more, less and less companies offering that, quality going down. Those things being, of course, not tested as rigorously as you have. So for various reasons in my own clinical practice, been using granules for a long time, because most of my patients, as maybe yours are as well, they are Northern American patients who need to take herbs for not just days, but for months and years, and get tired eventually of, and if it's not them themselves, their relatives, steaming up the whole house with these strongly smelling things,
Right.
then opting to, to just taking. So I think with this disease, to not take too much time here in answering this question, is granules work, capsules work, patent remedies work. The only thing is the amount needs to be closer to what normally would be a crude herb decoction. So you can't just go like, oh, I'm having 102 fever, and I have a bad sore throat and I've lost my sense of smell. What should I do? You can't just say take 4 grams of granules 2 times a day of a 5-to-1 decoction. That then is the equivalent of 8 grams a day times 5. That's like 40 grams when the crude herb decoction is 120 to 150 more likely. So we would prescribe more like take 6 to 7 to 8 grams, 4 to 5 grams a day, to a total of 24 to 30 grams of granules, or a total of 20 capsules of half a gram of 10-to-1 concentration. And so it matters to take more, and it matters that, of course, the company where you're getting it from is a reputable company that is not mixing lots of starch to it. So you're thinking you're getting a 10-to-1 or a 5-to-1, but you're really only getting a 2-to-1, because there's so much, 80% of that is potato starch or some other kind of filler or so, which is, I'm sad to say, now that I'm having inside front row seat in the natural products profession, it is worse than I ever thought this might be, or suspected as just being a consumer, is how common that is. So just, if you know your herbs that you're using work, then just use those, and no matter what form, and just use more of it, like equivalent of like 100 to 140 grams of crude herbs in a 24-hour period, and you should see some pretty good results.
Thank you. Sandra, can you get to the next person, and we'll unmute them? And while I just wanted to show this, so for those that want to watch this again, we're going to put this up on the TCM Knowledge page, and you can get to this through the resource page. So I just want to let you know that this will be up here, just like we've had other ones related to COVID. There's Ed Neal's. So Heiner's is going to show up on here as well, and you can get to that through the resource page. So when you click on resources and scroll down to TCM Knowledge, just click on any of these ones that say replay. Heiner's will say replay in a moment. Heiner actually talked about the cytokine storm. We have a whole talk just on the cytokine storm yesterday, so you can watch that. So just want to let you know that's available for you guys if you want to check that out. Let's bring in the first question, Sandro.
Okay, Jennifer, you should have mic right now. You should have a...
Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great, all right. Hi, Dr. Heiner, thank you so much. I'm sure you know, and you've heard probably a lot from a lot of your students and practitioners. Just in my area alone, probably 25 to 30 people just in the last month who didn't have to go to the hospital because of your support, the support of your gang at Classical Pearls. But it's just been really, it's great to have the support, and I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody here does. Several of us have been bouncing around the concept of the blood stagnation that's showing up for some people, and we're finding it even earlier sometimes than before they get to that end stage in the hospital. I'm curious about, I've been using a lot of the lightning thunder approach combined with a Chaihu based formula, and sometimes adding in some of the in-chow still, and treating so many people and having to do it for such a long period of time, having the capsules and the granules have been really helpful. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to best include, say, danshen, maybe as one of your single granule formulas or herbs, adding that in, or
this is a very good question. I've been thinking about that a lot. So thank you for asking that, particularly now that it's more pertinent. I think, of course, the when we hear blood clot in Western medicine, then that doesn't, because we heard, right, that there is people who don't have any symptoms and don't ever got tested for COVID, but they have a car accident and now they're dead, and now there's an autopsy and they see, oh, these people have COVID and they have blood clots. So without them knowing, they have that. And a lot of these kind of neurological symptoms can be explained from that. But from a Western medicine perspective, from a Chinese medicine perspective, that kind of clot doesn't necessarily mean it is blood stasis. It could also be qi stagnation. And that's why I find that it's so important to have these chaihu remedies there at the get-go. And while I found the chaihu remedies like xiao chaihu tang and chaige jieji tang feature very prominently in the SARS approach of Dr. Deng Jie Tao, as you can read in this paper. But and as I remember recalling from the interview I did with him 15 years ago, when he was still very much alive and doing Tai Chi and was an incredibly vigorous yet kind man at the same time, it didn't feature so prominently as you can see in the Shanghai paper, in the Shanxi paper on the children. In this government paper, there's a lot of ma huang, which ephedra, which we are not allowed to use. There is cinnamon that Liu Lihong like to use in China, but I think this kind of gu approach here very important. The Yinhua Lianxiao is very important, and then of course you're already in the gu approach. You have something that is preempting. There is some blood movement with the Dangui Chuanxiong already in there. There is already some protecting the yin of the heart, so you're not getting myocarditis with Huang Jing in the, for instance. But I believe that high amounts of chaihu are, and Professor Huang Huang also, I think, said that, another sort of well-known person in the West who is like Liu Lihong's generation, sort of in his 60s, and gives a lot of talks. I think Sharon Weizenbaum particularly sponsors him sometimes, and so some of you might have taken his. So he, in the Shanghai Lit itself, the Xiao Chaihu Tang, Chaihu Guizhi Ganjiang Tang is 24 grams. So at that amount, it's not an antidepressant, but it becomes a very strong antiviral, antifebrile remedy, and I believe moves the qi so strongly that it will prevent, that it basically is a blood mover and is working there. So it's not like I'm not using Taoren, Honghua, Dibia Chong, those kind of hardcore blood cracking kind of herbs. I'm therefore, I'm on my way to have my patients develop blood clots. There is enough of that, I think, already there. But once you already have more blood clot, like more blood stasis symptoms with kind of fixated pain and this kind of purplish kind of stuff going on, then of course you need to use danshen yin maybe, or also I think, so I believe in Chinese medicine it's important. The blood is not moving because the qi is not moving. The qi is not moving is because there's excess qi stagnation and gets stuck in the damp maybe. So you got to get rid of the damp. You got to move the qi. That's chaihu is, particularly with these kind of aromatic herbs with it, like baidoukou, like sharen, like even Yinhua Lianxiao, like shichangpu, that features prominently in the thunder and lightning. You have I lost my train of thought here. Where was I going with that? Sorry about that. So there you can add. So another possibility. This was it. is that the qi is deficient, and that's,
Seeing that a lot.
Thunder Pearls has the Huang Qi that also features prominently in Professor Hu Changjiang's prevention regimen that was also very prominent in China with the Yuping Fengshan Jade Screen Powder plus approach. But later on, once you start throwing clots, you got to go to the kidney and to the source, and you need to use aconite or kind of, like Dushan Tang, some kind of wild ginseng or so, when the person is like, seriously, the pulse is like this kind of the separation syndrome where yin and yang are separating, and very clearly that person is in distress and is about to die. Again, those people, we're probably not going to see those. That's why I think, but remedies that I am thinking about and that I've already started using more in the recovery phase, because people might have this kind of I had myocarditis from the Coxsackie virus 20 years ago with 4-year-long damage that lasts even now, 20 years later. Every time I get a cold, I get this kind of oppression in the chest and more easily get shortness of breath. Has stopped running since that time, only do Qigong and other kinds of cardio exercises, but much more. So Sheng Mai San, Dan Shen Yin, but also Qian Yang Dan, Qian Yang Feng Shui Dan, those will be remedies that will become important. So, and that I've used with people who believe that they had that, and now they feel like tired and have shortness of breath still. So Heart Pearls, I think, combines a lot of the blood movers, as well as the Sheng Mai San, as well as the Dan Shen Yin, as well as the aconite. And then if you want to, you can still, if people still feel, I feel sort of Shaoyangi electric skin sensitivity, or then you can still add Ease Pearls or Xiao Chai Rotang to that, or you can add Yin Xiao San to that, is still a possibility. But also possibly other kinds of remedies, like of course Xuefu Zhuyu Tang, which is in the classical pearls type of products, is still, because it's so sticky, it's difficult to put in the capsule. Been sitting at the encapsulator for months now, but should come out soon. So that has Chaihu plus blood movers Tao Hong Su Wu Tang in there. And then of course Da Huang Zhichong Wan is already out there. The only caveat there is 24 grams of Dihuang. So do we want to use Dihuang for people who are basically been diagnosed with sticky damp disease? Maybe at a certain point when there are cytokine storms, you need to really consolidate the kidneys with all you have, with aconite, with Dihuang, with Huangbai, all at the same time, and Sharon on top of it, to use this triple kidney consolidation approach. Use Xianyang Dan, Feng Shui Dan, plus something like Da Huang Zhichong Wan, or somebody who gets put on not just on a respirator, but where people are saying, you now need to be on we don't have enough of these kidney, what are those, dialysis equipment, that would be more like Jingui Shenqi Wan. Possibly Dihuang might be needed, particularly in the recovery phase. I don't know, but I haven't seen those people, because knock on wood, so far, at least the kind of people we've seen, they all kind of got arrested in this kind of Taiyang Yangming Shaoyang, maybe Taiyin, but never really Shaoyin Juyin stage where, but I think those are the kinds of remedies I'm thinking about. And there's specific questions also on that support forum at classicalpearls.org that you can slowly read through, where I have spelled that out more coherently than I just did. And you can take your time to read through that. But thank you for your encouragement, appreciation, and this additional question here.
Jennifer, you should have mic rights. All right, we'll go to
Lauren.
Lauren. I'm Lauren. I'm Lauren, and she's Lauren. Lauren, you should
Hi.
have plates.
Thank you. So forgive me for a rudimentary question. I'm just a recent graduate and don't feel like I have a good handle on all the herbs.
No problem, no problem.
Thank you. So you said, I know you said two things at the same time, and I understand there's the, there's the herbs that people have been used preventatively. At the same time, we don't think of ourselves as, thinking as treating a virus per se. So I know that if you're doing individual treatments, you're really trying to find balance within the person so that you can, your body can transform the dampness and you're less susceptible. But can you, just going back to the idea of that they were going into Wuhan, they were taking preventative meds, there were sort of drugs, or herbs, I should say, among the practitioners. Can you remind me what the herbs were or the formulas that they were using?
This is the interesting thing. This is like, I need to be careful I don't go here too long, because this is just from an anthropological perspective so interesting, is that we don't know what these people were taking, because since it wasn't in the government mandated approach, it would be politically wrong for them to make a suggestion online unless they wanted to be taken down within a short period of time. You see, this is the bizarre thing that is happening right now in China, is that at the surface, traditional Chinese culture is being more fostered now, and Chinese medicine along with it, with policies that have been established during the last few years, than more than the last 50 years before that, because that's the official line. Within that, though, something that is much more strictly regulated in comparison to before is it cannot be associated with a single person. Okay, it's all, so when it comes down from the government, then that's great, and that always means standardization, but it can't be Dr. Liu Dihong or Dr. Huang Huang or Dr., unless they are sort of deceased, like Deng Tietao or so, and is now like a holy person there. People have to be extremely careful in not saying, here's my remedy for that, because that would then be, that's not, so there is this very interesting phenomena where also, like, let's say in the realm of Qigong, my main teacher is writing books, and already when I'm in China in 1990, his book comes out. It has a picture of him treating famous people. He has a biography of him and his teacher. Then that gets made into, one of my students makes a film script, takes a year off of school as a professional script writer, and then finds a famous Hollywood person to say, okay, I'm going to be the producer of this. But in recent years, been working with China, no problem. We'll find there's tons of monies for movies like this. We're going to make this movie with Chinese money. And all of a sudden, this movie can't get made, because in the beginning, people are like, 7 years ago, oh, new leader, we don't know where the wind blows. This is a little touchy, Guomindang times, Qigong, woo-woo kind of stuff. So, and now it's 7 years later, and this movie never gets done. Dr. Wang wants to publish his own life story again, which was okay 20-some years ago, but is now not allowed anymore, unless all of the pictures are removed, all personal information is removed, and it's just about the medicine. But it can't have anything with any kind of thing that could elevate somebody to some kind of a, cult kind of status, or some kind of lineage kind of thing that is not, unless it's been mandated or allowed by the government. So this is and that's why when you read through Dr. Liu Dihong's extremely detailed account here, it has more directional approaches. And he says, we did things differently from the government, but it doesn't say, here's our remedies with this much gram or so. And that is not because he doesn't want to, or wants to keep it secret. Quite the opposite. He's been out there lecturing his head off, but that's just being careful to make sure that he's only going with the official flow and not ever, even indirectly, insinuating that he wants to do something parallel to the government's overall objective, and is therefore saying, it's like, anyway, so that is sort of that kind of thing. I personally, when it comes to prevention, in the beginning, I thought that the anti-goo approach, like using thunder pearls especially, was sufficient. Now when people call me, or using jiajian suhetang, use the more classical term here, because you can't just use diaphoretics for months and months to blast somebody's surface open, but you tethering them down with qi tonics, blood tonics, yin tonics, and qi movers, blood movers, antiviral medicine. So you're having these food grade substances that work both internal as well as external. So to keep you suitable, therefore, to take over longer periods of time. But I feel like that lots of people come in here because they treated with Dangui Sunitang for accompany their Western medicine cancer treatment, or they normally a Juyin type, getting things like evergreen pearls, like mama pearls, something like that, maybe ginkgo pearls. All of a sudden, they need Chaihu remedies because they have that fine and wiry pulse on the left, or they have a poor appetite in the morning, or they have sort of a slight fullness of the ear, but they don't have sore throat, they're not sick, they don't have a fever. So I find like, all of a sudden 70% of patients who come in who very likely don't have COVID, but something, that pestilential qi is knocking at the door and is forcing everybody into this Shaoyang scenario. So very often now when people call me and say, I'm in New York or New Jersey and I'm a nurse in a hospital, then even more so, what should I do preventatively? Then it won't be just thunder or lightning or yin xiao san, but it'll be together with East Pearls, or together with Xiao Chai Wu Tang or Chai Wu Gui Zhi Ganjian Tang. Like, I don't know, take 2 of each 3 times a day or so, whereas in the beginning I thought 2. It just depends how, if you are a 55-year-old person and you are anxious and therefore you are just at home, not going anywhere, just take once a day, or just take 3 thunder or 3 thunder or 2 thunder and 2 E's twice a day is absolutely enough. But you feeling like you're doing something, that's very important for somebody like that. But if you are in a hospital treating people and guaranteed you're being exposed, then you need to do that at least, like at slightly higher amounts. And but again, the answer to the question is not just the GU approach. Even on the West Coast here, I've started using Chaihu remedies on top of it, of this GU approach, just to be sure that there isn't, coming back to Jennifer's question earlier, because there might be stagnation symptoms there, even like some people having some mini clots, if it's indeed COVID there. So just to kind of make sure that the qi and that means not just the blood flow, but the lymph flow, everything is moving nicely. And it helps, where does anxiety come from? If it's not the Shaoyang, it's the Juyin. So it also helps people be less depressed, less anxious, etc.
Thank you very much, Heiner. And just so we have a couple, we're over time, but we're going to run out of the extra time that we have. We have a calling user. We don't have your name, so can you state your name? We just unmuted you from somebody on their phone.
Yes. Good afternoon again. This is Andy, reaching you from the Bay Area. Professor Fruehauf, I've long been aware of, Professor Liu's bestseller in China, I might say probably 17 years ago. At the time, I only knew about it through excerpts that you had translated into English in some of your articles. So you might say that to know about this book now is something like 17 years in the making. I wanted to make this as brief as I can, perhaps an offer to any readers who may be open to it. I wanted to ask about the first book and also about the second book. I don't think you mentioned that today, but I did read about both books briefly. They were mentioned in the article you translated from Wuhan. The first book is primarily about the Shanghanlun approach, and that's mostly, I believe, because Professor Liu, for most of his career, has been an herbalist. But the second book, which I just found out about, and that's a newer book, that is based primarily on a Taoist lineage of acupuncture.
Yes.
That he has been immersed in. And my understanding from the Wuhan article is Professor Liu has only trained as an acupuncturist within the last 5 years.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. I mean, the first book, by the way, thank you for mentioning that, actually came out from us bringing a group of students over in 2000 and in 1999
right.
At Lake Lugu, and one of his friends wanted to listen to that, and said at that time nobody had iPhones or anything like that, so I had this archaic tape recorder, and then he had a recording of 7 days of Shanghanlun lectures, and then he said, well, I have this later. He made a copy and then had some of his students transliterate that, and then somebody said you should make a book out of that. So that was the beginning of this bestseller. The Sukao Zhongyi later became classical Chinese medicine, selling more of 1 million books in China, completely unheard of for a nonfiction book. And you're absolutely right. After being sort of a philosopher of Chinese medicine, definitely an internist of kind of Shanghanlun, then later fire spirit school, studying with Dr. Lu Chonghan, doing a lot of work, basically bringing Fuzi back, and my own efforts of bringing Fuzi back in the Western market has a lot to do with that, of being in contact with him since 1999. We have the same Qigong teacher I just mentioned, so we technically Shi co-disciples there underneath the same teachers. I heard about him since 1990, really, when he was still a doctoral student in Nanjing. But yes, in the last 5 years, because of the success of the first book, he gets all of these letters from everywhere saying, here is this, because he later then was able, with government funding, able to establish a research institute that's called the Institute for the Clinical Research of Classical Chinese Medicine within Guangxi University of Chinese Medicine Pharmacology. He just retired from that job. And so people wrote to him and said, we are not TCM practitioners, but we have this ancient lineage and nobody heeds us. We see a lot of patients, but we are not worth anything and nobody wants to know anything, and we can't publish our books. Can you take on our cause? And then he would publish these books written by his own resources from the Institute. And then all of a sudden that lineage would get famous. And it was literally, endorsed by Liu Lihong. That meant all of a sudden tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people became aware of that. So one of those things was this Taoist acupuncture lineage. He's, by the way, also been the main promoter of 5-element Worsley acupuncture in China for more than 10 years now, but it's never inspired him to actually do it himself. It wasn't until 5 years ago that he started with this Taoist teacher near Beijing called Yang Zhenhai, who he then eventually became the designated lineage holder of that lineage. At him coming in his late 50s to this acupuncture, now here's this man who always drips of philosophy and herbs, and all of a sudden you drinking wine with him, and halfway through the conversation you start itching and he says, what do you have? Let me treat you. And he gets his needles out and wants to immediately stick needles into you. So he is like 90% now an acupuncturist and loves to talk about that. And the latest outcome of that is the Huangdi Neizhen, published 3 years ago in China or so, that we more quickly translated with the help of Sabina Wilms, that was still involved in orchestrating the funding, especially for this. And again, a beautiful publication just came out this last month in, I think it's called The Yellow Emperor's Inner Transmission of Acupuncture. You can get that directly from the publisher's website still until the end of May at a 25% discount from the Chinese University of Hong Kong Press. But
Professor, if I may, I appreciate your reply very much. Actually, I was going to make a brief offer. If any readers, perhaps in the U.S., would be open to my help to order it here in this country, they may be able to follow up with me on either book at TCM Book Display on YouTube. Again, that's TCM Book Display on YouTube. And I'm very moved. I've started to preview the first book, you know, the bestseller from 17 years ago. And I can only say that in English translation, it's already very, very poignant, very simple and yet profound in the writing style.
Well, thank you.
We have reached our time, way over time, but it was so well worth it because this is such great information, and you, my community, are amazing people and well deserved it as well. This is when we open up our mics. Heiner, I want to say personally thank you for making the time to present this. Sandra and Lorianne, again, for working tirelessly behind. You guys are here for these 90 minutes to 2 hours, but there's hours before and after to make this happen. So thank you to my team. And again, Heiner, thank you. Let's open the mics. Give Heiner your gratitude, appreciation, and love, and connect with your colleagues that are on as well. Look at your pictures and send that love. Let's do our community, unity, immunity to end this.
Thank you, Heiner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amazing. You're doing. You too, Lauren. Sandra.
Okay, help me out then.
Thank you
Put
so
the
much.
balloon away.
Loved your breakdown and clinical applications.
Thank you so much.
Miss
Thank
seeing your
you.
picture.
Thank you.
Good to see all of you.
Thank you. Miss you.
Hi, everyone.
Everybody stay healthy, please, and stay in that community spirit. Thank you so much, Lauren, for promoting that. And yes, it's awesome to be part of this community.